the world of Easton Academy, Lingia was just another invisible girl, until the moment everyone realized they were wrong about her. Lingia wasn't the kind of girl who liked to stand out. She didn't have the flashy clothes or the expensive gadgets that most of the other students at Easton Academy had. She wasn't rich, and she didn't come from a family with a history of power or influence. Lingia was from a small village, a place far away from the big city where the school was located. When she first arrived at the academy, she did so on an old, broken bike, one that had clearly seen better days. When the other students saw Lingia, they didn't think much of her. In fact, most of them barely noticed her. To them, she was just another ordinary girl who didn't fit in with the elite crowd. They called her a hillbilly behind her back, making fun of her rural background and the way she looked. Her clothes were simple, and she didn't have the confidence that many of her classmates seemed to have. They looked down on her for not fitting into the glamorous world they lived in. At Easton Academy, appearances meant everything. The popular students wore designer clothes and drove shiny cars. They came from wealthy families with legacies that stretched back for generations. Lingia had none of that. She was quiet, kept to herself, and avoided attention. Most of her classmates assumed that she was just another girl who didn't belong there, someone who was lucky to even be enrolled in such an exclusive school. They never took the time to get to know her. But what they didn't know was that Lingia's life was far from ordinary. Lingia was not just a regular student at Easton Academy. She was the heir to one of the wealthiest families in the world, the Lin family. Her family owned an empire worth billions of dollars, with luxury properties spread across the globe. They had mansions, private jets, and cars that only the wealthiest people could dream of owning. One of their cars, a limited edition Maybach with a starry roof, was a symbol of their status in the world. Despite all the wealth surrounding her, Lingia had been raised to stay humble. Her parents had always taught her that wealth didn't make a person better than anyone else. It was kindness, hard work, and character that mattered the most. So, Lingia kept her family's fortune a secret, not wanting to stand out or make her classmates feel bad. She didn't want to be treated any differently just because she had money. She believed that her value as a person came from who she was, not how much money she had. At first, she tried to blend in with the other students, hoping that no one would notice her. She kept her head down, focused on her studies, and avoided the popular crowd. She didn't want to draw attention to herself, but no matter how much she tried to hide, the signs of her wealth were impossible to miss. It started with the small things. Her classmates noticed that she always looked put together. Her clothes were simple but elegant, and her makeup, though subtle, was always perfect. Her hair, long and shiny, never looked out of place. There was something about her that stood out, even though she never tried to be noticed. Some of the students couldn't help but wonder about her. How could someone from such a simple background look so sophisticated? Soon, whispers began to spread. Some students started to question who Lingia really was. Why did she always look so polished? How could she afford such high-quality clothes? Where did she get the money to buy designer cosmetics and accessories? These questions were on the minds of many students, but Lingia continued to stay silent, keeping the truth hidden. She didn't want anyone to know that she came from a family so rich that they could buy anything they wanted. Her kindness didn't go unnoticed either. Lingia wasn't the kind of person to brag about her wealth or flaunt her possessions. Instead, she used her resources quietly and humbly. She donated large sums of money to charity events at school, and she helped organize fundraisers for causes she cared about. She did all of this without ever seeking the spotlight. But despite her quiet generosity, rumors about her wealth began to spread, and people started looking at her differently. Her classmates, especially those who didn't have much, started to feel threatened by her presence. They assumed that because she had money, she thought she was better than everyone else. They didn't understand that Lingia wasn't interested in showing off her wealth. She just wanted to live a normal life and make a difference in the world. By. Bullying started slowly at first, little comments here and there. She thinks she's better than us, they would say. Look at her, acting all high and mighty with her fancy clothes. Linjia tried to ignore them, but it was hard. She didn't want to be part of the drama or the gossip. All she wanted was to be left alone and treated like everyone else. But little did they know Linjia had a lot more strength inside her than they gave her credit for. The more they underestimated her, the more determined she became to show them that they were wrong. She wasn't just a rich girl trying to fit in. Linjia was someone who had the potential to change the world. And soon, everyone at Easton Academy would realize that the quiet, unassuming girl they had been bullying was much more than they ever imagined. But for now, they would continue to judge her based on her appearance and background. They would continue to call her a hillbilly and ignore her worth. Linjia would continue to keep her true identity a secret, just waiting for the right moment to reveal who she really was. But Linjia was about to show them that appearances can be deceiving. In the coming days, Linjia will no longer be the invisible girl at Easton Academy. She would prove to everyone that no matter where you come from, you could always rise above the judgment of others. And in the end, the people who underestimated her would be the ones who learned the most powerful lesson of all. Linjia could have flaunted her wealth, but instead, she chose to blend in, hoping no one would notice her. When Linjia first arrived at Easton Academy, she made a conscious decision to keep a low profile. Despite the fact that she came from a family worth billions, she didn't want anyone to know the truth. Linjia had seen how people treated the rich, often with jealousy or disrespect, and she didn't want to be the target of that. She also didn't want to stand out or attract unwanted attention. At her old school, she had learned the value of humility, and she planned to carry that lesson with her at Easton Academy. She didn't flaunt her wealth or boast about her family's fortune. Instead, she focused on her studies and tried to make friends without anyone noticing her background. She wore simple clothes, nothing too fancy or extravagant, and she made sure to keep her interactions with others low-key. Linjia wasn't interested in showing off or using her wealth as a way to gain popularity. All she wanted was to be treated like everyone else. However, as much as Linjia tried to blend in, the signs of her wealth were impossible to hide. Her classmates began to notice the little things. Her clothes, although simple, were of the highest quality, well-tailored, stylish, and perfectly put together. She never wore the same outfit twice, and the accessories she wore, like a delicate bracelet or a high-end watch, caught the attention of her peers. The designer cosmetics she used were top-notch, and her skin always looked flawless, a detail that many of the other girls at school couldn't help but envy. Linjia's aura was another thing that stood out. She carried herself with a certain grace, a quiet confidence that came from within. It wasn't arrogance, but there was something about her that was hard to ignore. It wasn't just her looks, it was the way she spoke, the way she held herself, and the way she moved through the school without ever seeming to be in a rush. She exuded a calm sophistication that left her classmates both curious and wary. At first, the other students couldn't quite put their finger on it. They weren't sure what to think of her. Was she just another girl trying to act rich, or was there something more to her? Some students couldn't help but whisper to each other whenever Linjia walked by. "She's definitely hiding something," they'd say. "She looks so different from the rest of us." Despite their curiosity, Linjia continued to stay quiet. She never gave them any reason to suspect her true identity, and she certainly didn't want to make a fuss. She just went about her day, keeping her head down, focusing on her studies, and doing her best to avoid any attention. However, the more she tried to hide, the more her classmates grew suspicious. Soon, the teasing started. It wasn't anything direct at first, just subtle comments that Linjia overheard as she walked through the halls. "Who does she think she is? Wearing those fancy clothes?" one girl would say, rolling her eyes. "Probably just another rich kid who thinks she's better than us." Another student might comment, "Did you see the way she carries herself? Like she's royalty or something?" They were little remarks, but they stung nonetheless. The bullying wasn't just limited to whispers and side glances. Some students took it further, mocking her openly. At lunch, a group of girls from one of the popular cliques started making fun of Linjia's clothes, calling her out for wearing something that, to them, was too good for her. They couldn't understand why a girl who came from a simple background, like Linjia's, would dress so well. To them, it didn't make sense. If she was rich, why wasn't she acting like the others? Why was she trying to be so humble? Linjia didn't say anything to defend herself. She simply ignored them, trying her best to act like she didn't hear their words. She didn't want to draw attention to the situation, but inside, it hurt. She had always been taught to be kind, to treat others with respect, and to never show off. Yet here she was being mocked for doing exactly that, keeping a low profile. The bullying didn't stop there. Liu Jiaxi, one of the most popular girls in school, took a particular interest in Linjia. Liu Jiaxi came from a family of street vendors and had never been wealthy. She was used to fighting for everything she had, and she saw Linjia's quiet demeanor as a challenge. To her, Linjia represented everything she didn't have: wealth, beauty, and privilege. She began to target Linjia, making snide remarks and trying to provoke her whenever she could. But Linjia didn't react. She didn't want to get caught up in petty drama. She stayed calm, kept to herself, and focused on her studies. Deep down, she knew that the more she kept quiet, the more the other students would try to get a rise out of her. But Linjia wasn't interested in playing their games. She had learned a long time ago that responding to insults only gave them more power. So she did what she always did. She kept her head down and hoped that the teasing would eventually stop. Yet as time went on, it became clear that the bullying wasn't going to stop anytime soon. Her classmates saw her as a threat, someone they couldn't quite understand. They didn't know her story, her struggles, or her true background. All they saw was a girl who didn't seem to belong, a girl who had everything they wanted but didn't flaunt it. They didn't understand why someone with so much wealth would want to blend in instead of standing out. But little did they know, Linjia was far from the quiet, shy girl they thought her to be. She wasn't just hiding her wealth, she was hiding her strength, her intelligence, and her drive. And as the weeks passed, Linjia began to realize that she couldn't keep hiding forever. The more she stayed quiet, the more the bullying escalated, and she knew that eventually she would have to stand up for herself. But while Linjia kept quiet, the world around her was beginning to change. The time was coming when Linjia would no longer be the invisible girl in the background. Her classmates might think they had her figured out, but they were about to be proven wrong. Linjia had a secret that would soon be revealed, and when it was, everything would change. The girl they had underestimated was about to show them all that appearances can be deceiving. When the quiet girl starts turning heads, it's never without consequences, and for Linjia, those consequences were harsh. At first, Linjia thought that she could continue to blend in and avoid drawing attention to herself. She kept her wealth hidden and focused on her studies. However, as the weeks went by, the more she tried to keep a low profile, the more the other students seemed to notice her. It wasn't just her expensive clothes or her quiet confidence. They began to notice that she wasn't like everyone else. This made her a target for some of the more popular students, especially Jiajia and her friends. Jiajia, who came from a wealthy family herself, couldn't stand the idea of a girl like Linjia existing at Easton Academy. To her, Linjia was a threat, someone who wasn't using her money to show off, someone who wasn't trying to take the spotlight. Jiajia and her friends started spreading rumors about Linjia, calling her arrogant and snooty. They claimed that Linjia thought she was too good for everyone and that she was hiding her true nature to manipulate people. The whispers began to spread across the school like wildfire. Every day, more students joined in, repeating the lies Jiajia had started. It wasn't long before the bullying became more personal. Jiajia and her group started targeting Linjia in every possible way. They would make nasty comments whenever Linjia walked by, sneering at her for wearing designer shoes or carrying an expensive handbag. They would make snide remarks in class, accusing her of pretending to be humble when she was really just trying to play the part of a poor girl who didn't belong. Some of the insults were harsh, calling her fake and accusing her of using her wealth to make others feel inferior. But it didn't stop there. Jiajia and her friends would go out of their way to embarrass Linjia in front of her peers. During lunch, they would sit near her table and loudly talk about how Linjia was trying to act normal while secretly looking down on everyone. They spread rumors about her, claiming that she was snobby and rude behind closed doors. It wasn't just about her wealth anymore. It was about tearing her down piece by piece, trying to make everyone believe that Lingia wasn't as nice as she appeared to be. The worst part was that the students at Easton Academy seemed to be buying into it. Every day, more and more people started to treat Lingia differently. They'd give her cold stares, and some of them would even avoid talking to her. Lingia had always been the kind of person who liked to stay quiet and not draw attention to herself, but now she felt completely isolated. Some of the teachers even started to treat her with suspicion, questioning her motives when she volunteered to help with charity events or gave large donations. It seemed like no one wanted to see the good in her. Instead, they chose to believe the worst. At the heart of the bullying was Liu Jiaxi. Liu Jiaxi came from a humble background, the daughter of street vendors who worked hard to make ends meet. She had always felt the weight of not having money or status, and she had worked hard to carve out her place in the school. But when she saw Lin Jia, this quiet, poised girl who didn't flaunt her wealth, Liu Jiaxi felt threatened. To her, Lin, Jia was everything she wished she could be: confident, sophisticated, and effortlessly beautiful. But what made Liu Jiaxi most upset was that Lin Jia didn't seem to care about her wealth. It was as if Lin Jia was playing a game, hiding her riches, while the rest of them struggled. Liu Jiaxi couldn't accept that. She felt like Lin Jia was mocking her, showing everyone that it was possible to have it all without even trying. Liu Jiaxi became the main person behind the bullying, always finding ways to push Lin Jia's buttons. She would challenge Lin Jia in class, accuse her of being a show-off, and try to get the other students to join in. She would even go so far as to make fun of Lin Jia's appearance, calling her a fake rich girl, and saying that Lin Jia only pretended to be humble so people would like her. Liu Jiaxi knew exactly how to get under Lin Jia's skin, and she didn't stop until she had completely torn apart Lin Jia's reputation. Despite all of this, Lin Jia tried to stay calm. She had been taught to rise above petty drama and not let the opinions of others dictate her happiness. But every day, the bullying became worse. It wasn't just words anymore. It was full-on harassment. Liu Jiaxi would comment about Lin Jia's clothes, her family, and even her character. Every time Lin Jia walked into a room, it felt like the eyes of the entire school were on her, judging her and whispering behind her back. It was hard to ignore, especially when it felt like no one was on her side, but Lin Jia was stronger than the bullies realized. Despite the hurtful words and the constant attacks, she didn't back down. She wasn't going to let Jia or Liu Jiaxi define who she was. She didn't have to prove herself to anyone. Her family's wealth didn't make her any less of a person, and she wasn't going to let their cruelty make her question her own worth. However, the bullying was taking its toll on her. She was tired of hiding, tired of letting others push her around. Lin Jia had always been taught to be humble and patient, but she was beginning to understand that sometimes silence was not the answer. Sometimes standing up for yourself was the only way to show others that you would not be silenced. It seemed like Lin Jia's life would always be filled with cruel remarks until she decided to take action. The time had come for Lin Jia to stop running from her problems and face them head on. The bullies had pushed her far enough, and it was time to show them that she wasn't going to take their abuse lying down. Lin Jia had more to offer the world than they realized, and now it was time for her to prove it. The quiet girl who had once stayed in the background was ready to take control of her own story, and nothing, not even the bullies, was going to stop her. Sometimes the quietest people have the most powerful stories to tell, and Lin Jia was ready to tell hers. For weeks, Lin Jia had kept her head down and tried to avoid the spotlight. But as the bullying became more intense, something inside her began to shift. She realized that staying silent and allowing the rumors to spread would only make things worse. It was time to stand up for herself, not through confrontation, but through actions that spoke louder than words. She didn't need to yell or argue, she simply needed to show her true self. Lin Jia's first act of defiance came during the school's annual charity event. Every year, Easton Academy held a fundraiser to support local causes, and the students were encouraged to donate money. It wasn't just a way to raise funds, it was also a way to show off their social status. Many of the wealthier students donated. large sums to make themselves look good, and Linjia had always stayed on the sidelines watching. But this year, things were different. At the charity event, Linjia made a large donation, one that stunned everyone in the room. It wasn't just a small amount, it was a sum so big that even the richest students were surprised. She didn't make a grand speech or draw attention to herself. Instead, she simply handed over the money quietly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The reaction was immediate. Whispers spread through the room. Some students thought she was showing off her wealth, while others were shocked by her generosity. But one thing was clear. They were starting to see Linjia in a new light. The girl who had once been ridiculed for her quiet demeanor was now being viewed as someone with a lot more depth than they had originally assumed. Her classmates began to question the rumors they had heard. Was she really just a rich, arrogant girl trying to pretend she was humble? Or was there more to her than they had realized? The donation didn't just change how the other students viewed Linjia, it also changed how Linjia viewed herself. For the first time, she felt like she was doing something that mattered. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't just the girl on a broken bike. She was someone who could make a real difference. By giving to charity, she wasn't just helping others. She was starting to break free from the shadows of the past and letting her true self shine through. But that was just the beginning. Linjia didn't stop with just one act of kindness. Over the next few weeks, she started standing up for herself in small yet powerful ways. When Jia or Liu Jiaxi made cruel comments about her, Linjia didn't just ignore them. She calmly responded, not with anger, but with the intelligence and maturity she had been hiding all along. She pointed out the flaws in their arguments and calmly corrected their misunderstandings. Each time, her responses left her bullies speechless. They had expected her to get upset or defensive, but instead, Linjia kept her composure, showing them that she was much stronger than they had thought. Even when the rumors and bullying became unbearable, Linjia didn't let it break her. She continued to go about her schoolwork, excel in her classes, and quietly stand up for others who were being bullied as well. She began to make friends who admired her strength, kindness, and grace under pressure. They started to see her not as the quiet, humble girl they had once mocked, but as someone who was much more capable than they had ever given her credit for. As more people began to see the real Linjia, the rumors about her started to fall apart. Classmates who had once whispered behind her back now started to approach her with curiosity, asking her about the charity donation or the way she had responded to the bullies. They were fascinated by her calm demeanor and her ability to stay so composed in the face of such cruelty. They had assumed that Linjia was just like the other rich girls at Easton Academy, arrogant and entitled. But now they were starting to see that she was different. She wasn't trying to flaunt her wealth or put others down. Instead, she was quietly building a reputation based on kindness, intelligence, and strength. Of course, there were still a few who refused to let go of their prejudices. Jia and Liu Jiaxi were still spreading rumors, trying to undermine Linjia's reputation. But their words were losing power. The more Linjia stood up for herself, the more the other students began to rally behind her. They could see that Linjia wasn't the villain they had been led to believe she was. Instead, she was a victim of their own ignorance and assumptions, and as more and more students started to realize this, the bullying began to lose its strength. Jia's story was slowly starting to change the school's atmosphere. Students who had once been too afraid to speak up were now starting to stand up for what was right. They began to question the way they had treated others in the past, and many of them started to apologize to Linjia for their role in the bullying. Some even came to her and asked if she could help them with their own struggles, knowing that she had been through something similar and had come out stronger on the other side. For Linjia, it was a turning point. She had always tried to keep her true self hidden, afraid that revealing her wealth and her kindness would make her a target. But now, she realized that she didn't need to hide. She didn't need to pretend to be someone she wasn't. Her generosity and her strength were qualities that made her unique, and it was time to stop running from them. The girl who had once been invisible was now the one everyone was watching. But Linjia's story wasn't over yet. She was about to take the next big step in revealing who she truly was. The journey had just begun for Linjia. What she had done so far was just a glimpse of her true self. She was about to take another step, one that would change everything. Jia was ready to show the world the full extent of her strength, kindness, and determination. The quiet girl from the small village was about to make her mark on Easton Academy, and no one would ever be able to underestimate her again. When the truth finally came out, the entire school was stunned, and so were the bullies. It all started during the final weeks of the school year, when Jia's life took an unexpected turn. Up until this point, she had carefully maintained her low profile, living quietly with the secret of her family's incredible wealth. However, all of that was about to change, and the moment it did, it would leave everyone, including the bullies, completely shocked. It happened during an important school event, a gala organized by the school to celebrate the end of the academic year. It was the kind of event where the rich and powerful students tried to outdo each other with fancy outfits, extravagant displays of wealth, and social clout. Jia had never really cared for the event, but she agreed to attend this year, partly because of the pressure from her friends who were finally starting to stand by her side. The night of the gala arrived, and Jia made an entrance that nobody could ignore. She didn't wear an over-the-top dress or try to steal the spotlight. Instead, she wore a simple, elegant outfit. But there was one thing that was different. She was accompanied by a few key figures from her family's empire. It wasn't the flashy appearance that caught everyone's attention, though. It was the subtle hint of power and authority that came with her companions. At first, no one understood the significance of her company. It wasn't until Jia's father, the head of the billion-dollar Lin family empire, stepped forward to make a surprise announcement. As soon as he spoke, the room fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice calm but commanding. I'm here tonight with my daughter, Jia, who is the heir to the Lin family fortune. Our family has supported Easton Academy for many years, and we are proud to have Jia continuing the legacy." There was an audible gasp from the crowd. For months, Jia had been hiding the fact that she was the heir to one of the richest families in the world. Everyone who had ever ridiculed her for her modest appearance, her broken bike, and her quiet demeanor now realized that they had been wrong about her. She wasn't just the humble girl they had thought. She was a billion-dollar heiress. For Jia and Liu Jiaxi, the revelation was nothing short of a shock. They had spent so much time mocking Jia, calling her arrogant and snobby, based on nothing more than assumptions. They had made her life miserable, thinking she was just a poor girl trying to fit in. But now their actions were coming, back to haunt them. Jia, whose family was wealthy in its own right, stood frozen, her mouth slightly agape. She had always tried to maintain her position as the queen of the school, looking down on Jia and making snide comments about her supposed pretensions. Now the truth was out, and Jia couldn't hide the shock on her face. She was suddenly very aware of just how wrong she had been. Liu Jiaxi, who had been Jia's most vocal bully, also stood there, stunned. She had targeted Jia with insults, thinking she could knock her down a peg. But now, as the truth settled in, Liu Jiaxi couldn't help but feel embarrassed. She had spent so much time trying to tear Jia down for no reason, and now, the rich girl they had mocked was standing right in front of them with a quiet grace, confident in her own skin. As the truth spread through the school, Jia noticed a shift. Some students were envious, wishing they had known the truth earlier. They whispered to each other about the luxury cars and massive estates Jia's family owned. Others felt guilty for having ever believed the rumors or for having participated in the bullying. Some of the students who had once joined in on the mockery now realized just how wrong they had been to judge Jia. They felt ashamed of their behavior, and a few of them approached Jia to apologize for their part in the bullying. Jia, however, didn't need their apologies. She had already moved on. The truth about her family had come to light, and while it certainly turned heads, it didn't change who she was at her core. Jia had always known that wealth wasn't the thing that defined her. It was her kindness, intelligence, and strength that made her who she was. She had built her reputation not on her family's name, but on her own actions. The school's perception of Jia had changed overnight. but Lin Jia remained the same. As she stood there, with her head held high, she made it clear that her wealth wasn't what mattered most. She was proud of her family, but she also wanted to prove that she wasn't just another rich girl who cared about status and power. Lin Jia was determined to show her classmates that she had much more to offer than just money. "Being wealthy doesn't define me," Lin Jia said calmly, her voice steady as she addressed the students in the room. "It's the way I treat others, the way I act, and the way I use my resources to help others that matters." Her words left an impact on everyone who heard them. Lin Jia wasn't just a spoiled heiress. She was a person who cared about more than just wealth. She was a role model, showing the students of Easton Academy that it was possible to be both rich and humble, generous and strong. The night ended with Lin Jia gaining the respect of those who had once underestimated her. Jia and Liu Jiaxi, still reeling from the shock, didn't have much to say. They could no longer hide behind their arrogance and cruelty. The truth was out, and Lin Jia had proven herself to be much more than they had ever imagined. Now that the cat was out of the bag, it was time for Lin Jia to show them who was really in control. Lin Jia had revealed the truth, but this was just the beginning. She was ready to take the next step in her journey, and the entire school was about to see just how much power she truly had, both in terms of wealth and the strength of her character. Lin Jia was finally free to be herself, and nothing could stand in her way now. Lin Jia was done being the quiet girl. Now it was her turn to take charge and stand up to the bullies. The moment she revealed her true identity as the heir to a billion-dollar empire, everything changed. Lin Jia had endured months of ridicule and bullying, but now, with the truth out in the open, she was ready to face her enemies head-on. No longer would she hide behind the mask of humility. It was time for her to show everyone the strength she had kept hidden all along. Her first confrontation came just days after the big reveal. Jia and Liu Jiaxi, still shaken by the news, were determined to maintain their dominance in the school. They couldn't let Lin Jia, the girl they had so carelessly tormented, take control of the situation, but Lin Jia wasn't about to back down. One afternoon, as Lin Jia was walking down the hall with a few friends, she saw Jia and Liu Jiaxi whispering and giggling by their lockers. The two girls looked up as Lin Jia approached, and their smiles quickly faded. They were expecting her to shrink away, just as she always had before. But this time it was different. Lin Jia held her head high and walked straight up to them, refusing to let them have the upper hand any longer. "You think you can just bully me and get away with it?" Lin Jia asked, her voice calm but firm. "I've had enough of your lies and your cruelty." Jia looked taken aback, clearly not expecting Lin Jia to speak out so boldly. Liu Jiaxi, on the other hand, sneered and tried to throw a few more insults her way. "Oh, so now you think you're better than us because of your family's money?" Liu Jiaxi scoffed, her eyes narrow. "You're nothing but a spoiled brat who's just pretending to be humble." Lin Jia didn't flinch. She knew that Liu Jiaxi was still trying to hold on to the power she had once felt over Lin Jia, but it was no longer working. With a quiet but confident smile, Lin Jia replied, "No, I'm not better than anyone, but I won't let you continue spreading lies about me, and I'm not afraid to stand up for myself anymore." The words hit harder than any insult could. Jia and Liu Jiaxi were taken aback, not knowing how to respond. Lin Jia had taken away their control, and now they were the ones who were uncomfortable. The next day, something unexpected happened. Some of the students who had once mocked Lin Jia, including a few of Jia's closest friends, started to distance themselves from her. They had seen Lin Jia for what she truly was, kind, strong, and unafraid to stand up for herself. They also began to realize that their previous behavior had been wrong. One of them, a girl named Mei, approached Lin Jia at lunch. Mei had never been a bully, but she had always been on the sidelines, watching the drama unfold. "Lin Jia," Mei said hesitantly, "I just wanted to apologize for being part of the group that made fun of you. I was wrong. You've been nothing but kind to everyone, and I see that now." Lin Jia smiled gently. "Thank you, Mei. I appreciate it." She didn't hold a grudge against May. After all, the girl had never been her enemy. May had just followed the crowd, unsure of what was right. Now, she was realizing the truth. Slowly but surely, more students began to offer their apologies. Even some of the former bullies who had once laughed at her from a distance now saw Linjia in a new light. They realized that their actions had been based on nothing more than assumptions. They had judged her for her quiet nature and her family's wealth, never bothering to get to know the real Linjia. But it wasn't just the students who were starting to notice Linjia's strength. Teachers, too, began to see her differently. They had always respected her intelligence and hard work, but now they understood her resilience. Linjia had never let the bullying affect her grades or her focus, and that made her stand out even more. She was proving that her worth was not just about money or status, it was about who she was as a person. As Linjia continued to stand her ground, she began to slowly unravel the schemes of the bullies. Jiajia and Liu Jiaxi had been using their social power to manipulate others and spread false rumors about Linjia. But now, Linjia had the upper hand. She started gathering evidence of their lies, whether it was recordings of their cruel comments or testimonies from students who had witnessed their behavior. It didn't take long for her to expose their manipulation. One day, Linjia met with the principal, Mr. Heiress, and presented everything she had gathered. She was calm and collected as she explained the situation, showing him the proof of Jiajia and Liu Jiaxi's actions. Mr. Heiress, though surprised by the extent of the bullying, was impressed by Linjia's maturity and the way she handled the situation. He assured her that he would take appropriate action, and within days, Jiajia and Liu Jiaxi found themselves facing consequences for their actions. The school began to change too. Students who had once been silent observers started to speak up. The message was clear. Bullying would no longer be tolerated, and standing up for what was right was more important than fitting in with the crowd. Linjia had not only taken control of her own life, but had also inspired others to do the same. But even as Linjia faced her enemies, there was one big question left. Would she find peace in this new life? The bullies were no longer in control, and Linjia had proved to herself and to everyone else that she was more than capable of standing up for what was right. But despite all the victories and the apologies, a part of her still wondered. Was she truly at peace with everything? Could she ever completely forget the pain and the hurt caused by the bullying? As she walked through the halls of Easton Academy, surrounded by friends who now respected her, Linjia realized that peace didn't come from others' approval or from the absence of bullies. It came from within. She had stood up for herself, and, in doing so, she had found strength she never knew she had. With a calm heart and a clear mind, Linjia was ready to face whatever came next. The school year was nearly over, but for Linjia, it was just the beginning of a new chapter in her life. Now that Linjia had taken charge of her own destiny, the future was wide open, full of opportunities and challenges, but she was ready to face them head-on. With every victory came a new challenge, but Linjia was ready for whatever came next. The past few months had been filled with struggles, but also immense personal growth for Linjia. From being the quiet, invisible girl who had endured bullying and judgment, she had transformed into someone confident, strong, and respected. She no longer had to hide or pretend to be someone she wasn't. Linjia had earned the respect of her peers, and that was a victory she had fought hard for. Her newfound reputation wasn't built on her wealth or status. It was built on her courage and the way she had stood up for herself. Even some of the students who had once bullied her, including Jiajia and Liu Jiaxi, started to apologize. They saw the strength and grace Linjia displayed, and it made them realize how wrong they had been. "Linjia," Jiajia said one day, her voice softer than usual, "I want to apologize for everything. I was jealous of you, and I let that jealousy turn into something ugly. You've changed. You're not just the quiet girl anymore. You're someone we all need to respect." Linjia gave her a small smile, accepting the apology without hesitation. She didn't need to hold on to anger or resentment. The past was the past, and Linjia had grown beyond it. She had learned that true strength didn't come from winning every battle, but from rising above the hurt and becoming better because of it. As her reputation improved, Lingia also grew as a person. She started to embrace her wealth and the opportunities it provided, but not in the way people might have expected. Lingia didn't flaunt her riches or use them to gain power over others. Instead, she found ways to use her resources to help those in need. For example, she used some of her family's wealth to fund a scholarship program for students who couldn't afford to pay for their education. She also volunteered at local charities and helped organize events that would make a positive difference in her community. She no longer felt the need to hide who she was, but she didn't want her wealth to define her. It was just a part of who she was, not the whole story. Lingia also started to embrace her personal growth. She realized that kindness, strength, and independence were just as important as her intelligence or her family's money. She had learned that being kind didn't make her weak, it made her stronger. She had learned that her strength came not from power, but from the ability to stand up for others as well as herself. Her friendships blossomed as she became more open and confident. People began to see her not just as a girl with money, but as someone with a kind heart and a strong mind. Her circle of friends grew, and they weren't drawn to her because of her wealth. They admired her because of her character. But despite all the changes she had gone through, Lingia knew that this wasn't the end of her journey. There was still more for her to accomplish, and she had a bigger mission ahead, one that would define her future. The story of Lingia was far from over. But, despite all the changes, Lingia still had a bigger mission ahead, one that would truly define her future. Sometimes gaining respect takes more than money or power. It takes heart. And Lingia had plenty of that. At Easton Academy, Lingia's transformation didn't go unnoticed. While her wealth had initially caused tension among some students, it wasn't her money that ultimately earned her respect. It was her inner strength, her kindness, and her ability to remain true to herself despite everything that had happened. Even the richest and most popular students at Easton Academy began to take notice of Lingia. They started to realize that she wasn't like the others. She didn't use her wealth to show off or put people down. Instead, she used her influence to make a real impact on the people around her. She had become a role model, and not because of her family's empire, but because of her character. People started to admire Lingia for who she was as a person, not just as the girl with the billion-dollar fortune. They admired her for the way she handled adversity with grace and the way she helped others without expecting anything in return. Lingia was no longer just the underdog. She had become someone to look up to. Her journey had inspired others, especially those who had been judged based on their background or appearance. Lingia had shown them that it was possible to overcome prejudice and stereotypes by staying true to oneself. She had been judged for being quiet, for being from a small village and for her family's wealth, but she had used those judgments to fuel her determination to rise above the negativity and show everyone what she was really made of. Some of her classmates, who had once been too shy or afraid to speak up, began to take her lead. They started standing up for themselves, showing kindness to others, and embracing who they were. Lingia had inspired them to stop hiding and be proud of their own strengths and backgrounds. They too had learned that respect didn't come from power or money. It came from being true to yourself and treating others with respect. As the year came to an end, Lingia realized that her journey wasn't just about fighting back. It was about becoming the best version of herself. It was about learning to use her resources for good, embracing who she was, and not allowing others' opinions to shape her identity. Lingia had found her own path, one that was based on kindness, strength, and integrity. She knew that the challenges she had faced weren't over, but she was no longer afraid. She had learned that no matter what life threw her way, she had the strength to handle it, and with her friends by her side, she was ready for whatever came next. As the year came to an end, Lingia realized that her journey wasn't just about fighting back, it was about becoming the best version of herself. In the end, it wasn't just about winning the fight, it was about finding herself along the way. The final showdown between Lingia and her biggest rival, Liu Jiaxi, was inevitable. It had been brewing for months. Liu Jiaxi, once a bully who had tried to tear Linjia down, now found herself standing in front of the quiet girl who had become stronger and more confident with every passing day. The tension between them was thick. Liu Jiaxi, still bitter and resentful, tried to provoke Linjia one last time, hoping to push her buttons and force her into a reaction. But Linjia had learned a lot during her time at Easton Academy. She knew that reacting out of anger or frustration wasn't the way to win, not anymore. With calmness and poise, Linjia faced her rival. She didn't raise her voice or try to tear Liu Jiaxi down with words. Instead, she simply smiled and said, "I'm not the same person I was when I first came here. I don't need to prove anything to you or anyone else." Liu Jiaxi, unable to understand why her usual tactics weren't working, grew frustrated. She tried to bring up the rumors, tried to twist the situation in her favor, but Linjia stood firm. Linjia had learned that her strength wasn't in her wealth or her ability to fight back with insults. It was in her ability to remain kind, calm, and composed, no matter what others threw her way. As the confrontation ended, it was clear who had won. Not Linjia's wealth, but her character. She had shown that kindness and inner strength were far more powerful than any attempt to bring her down. Both Linjia and her classmates learned an important lesson that day. Wealth didn't make you a better person. It was your character that defined you. Linjia had proven that you could rise above the cruelty of others by choosing to be kind, by staying true to yourself, and by standing firm in your beliefs. With the school year ending, Linjia was ready to leave her mark, not just on Easton Academy, but on the world. As Linjia looked ahead, she knew her journey was only beginning. The end of the school year was a time for reflection. Linjia couldn't help but think back to everything she had gone through, the bullying, the rumors, the battles she had fought, and the lessons she had learned along the way. From being the quiet girl who struggled to fit in to become a respected and admired figure at Easton Academy, Linjia had come a long way. She had proven that no matter where you came from or how others treated you, you could always rise above it and define your own path. Her plans for the future were clear. Linjia knew she wanted to continue her education, but more importantly, she wanted to use her resources to help others who had faced the same kind of discrimination and bullying she had. She had seen firsthand how cruel people could be to those who were different or didn't fit in. Now, she wanted to make sure no one had to go through that alone. Linjia's story has already inspired many people. She had become a symbol of hope and empowerment for others, especially those who had been judged based on their backgrounds or appearances. She had shown that wealth was not the key to success. It wasn't about how much money you had or what kind of car you drove. It was about your heart, your resilience, and the way you treated others. As the school year came to an end, Linjia felt a sense of pride in what she had accomplished, but she knew there was still much more to do. The challenges would continue, but she was ready. She had learned that she could face anything as long as she stayed true to herself and used her strength for good. Linjia's journey was just beginning, and she was excited for the future. Linjia's journey teaches us all that no matter where we come from, we can always change the narrative and prove the world wrong. Linjia's story proves that no matter where you come from or how others treat you, you have the power to define your own destiny. When Linjia first arrived at Easton Academy, no one could have predicted how much she would change. From the quiet girl on a broken bike to the confident, powerful young woman she had become, Linjia's story was one of personal growth, resilience, and the strength to rise above it all. Her journey reminds us that wealth isn't the measure of success. Character is. It's about staying true to yourself, no matter what others think or say. What did you think of Linjia's journey? Do you think she did the right thing in standing up to the bullies? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The best comment will be pinned. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more empowering stories like this. Thanks for watching. Sometimes the hardest battles lead to the greatest victories, and Linjia's story is proof of that. Never let anyone define you.